Welcome to the first international webinar sponsored by the World Federation of Athletic Training and Therapy. I'm so excited to see the response of this new initiative. We have over 475 registrants to this webinar. And I'm even more excited to be able to partner with the newest committee of the National Athletic Trainers Association, the Educationalist community, which I'm sure our guest speaker will comment on. Today's presentation is entitled Programmatic Assessment in a Remote World, using technology and evidence to assess student learning and program effectiveness in athletic training and therapy. Our guest speaker is Dr. Paul Geisler. Dr. Geisler has expressly requested that this introduction be kept short so as to not take away from his important information that he has to share today. Safe to say that Dr. Geisler has enjoyed a very successful career so far. Dr. Geisler is a professor and director of athletic training education at Ithaca College in upstate New York. He has been actively engaged in athletic training for more than 30 years, including the last 22 years as an AT educator and administrator. He has served on many NATA and EATA committees and currently serves as the inaugural chairperson of the NATA Educationalist community. He's chiefly interested in teaching, development and assessment of clinical reasoning in students, and authentic and effective assessment and approaches for AT education. So we're very pleased to have Dr. Geisler join us. Before we get going, some housekeeping notes. This session will be recorded and uploaded on the World Federation and the Educationalist websites. Dr. Geisler's presentation will be approximately 60 minutes, after which time we have allotted 30 minutes for questions. And questions can be submitted during the presentation using the Q&A feature. We ask that when you want to ask a question that you first of all look at the previous questions to see if it's already been asked or there's a similar one. And then you can like that question, which will upgrade the question and give us more priority on the question will be given more priority when it comes time to answer questions, and we'll have during the limited time of questioning. Dr. Geisler will be asking you to respond to poll questions throughout the presentation. The poll question will come up. You simply have to click on your response for it to be recorded, and just to let you know that all respondents are unidentifiable in the poll. Dr. Geisler will also have meta moments, allowing you to interact with the presentation, and you will be asked to use the chat function to do so. Once the webinar is ended, you will be sent a very short evaluation questionnaire. We would really appreciate a few more minutes of your time to give us your feedback. I think I've taken enough of this valuable time, so that I would like to welcome Dr. Geisler to the screen for his presentation. Dr. Geisler.
Glenn, thank you very much for that very generous introduction, and thank you, the man behind the screen, Bryce, for managing this webinar for us. I'm excited to be here. I'm ecstatic to be here. I hope that you're all well in this time. I appreciate the time you've carved out, and most people are zoomed out, but I'm excited to be involved with WFATT and the educationalist community. For those of you who don't know, the educationalist community of the NATA is a brand new special interest group for all folks in the profession and the membership that call themselves educators, program directors, clinical coordinators, core faculty, preceptors, administrators at every level. So it's designed to create larger, bigger conversations and voices and spaces for all of those folks in our profession. So this was an effort to provide some information to members of the NATA, and Dr. Bergeron was kind enough to invite me to work with WFATT members and launch this project. So here we go. So disclaimers, the standard disclaimers will be launched in a second. Here we go. So today's learning disclaimers basically are, I'm having a problem here. There we go. I have no conflicts of interest or anything to disclose, neither WFATT or the NATA or are represented in the views or information presented herein. So the other disclaimer is that I'm not an expert in this. I am kind of an intermediate, but I've been very passionate about learning about programmatic assessment and more authentic and direct measures and ways of assessing our program's effectiveness parallel to student learning as I go. So lots more to learn, but I'm happy to share what I know with you so far and create a conversation. But in today's session, I hope that you'll understand a capability as something that's a viable alternative to competency. We're all in a competency-based education world, and it's kind of the standard go-to for most places from a language and artifact standpoint. But I'm going to introduce capability, something that I view as something more appropriate and more challenging and more authentic. Some of you know this, some of you don't. I think one of the challenges to today's webinar is we have probably different levels of experience and familiarity with assessment, formative and summative. So we'll review it quickly for those who know it. We'll introduce it to those of you who are a little bit unsure. And maybe something that is new for a larger part of the audience is something known as assessment as learning. So you've probably heard of assessment for learning and assessment of learning related to the previous bullet point, but assessment as learning is something that to me is a lot more meaningful and a lot more exciting, strangely enough. Appreciate the role for intentional progress testing. One of the new things coming out in medical education is the role for progress testing. So we'll talk a lot about progress testing, how that can be part of your assessment as learning approach. And those of you who are in athletic training in the United States realize that continuous quality improvement is now a specific thing for the 2020 standards as we move to the master's degree. Some of you have already been doing CQI in various ways. Some of you may have been doing it and not knowing that you're doing it, just didn't have the verbiage for it. But you'll start to perceive that programmatic assessment is continuous quality improvement from an organizational or programmatic standpoint. And hopefully you'll also see that you can validly assess clinical decision-making and clinical reasoning, and in our case, capability using online virtual modules as opposed to, or in parallel or in concert with pen and paper methods of the past, as well as workplace-based assessment or live situational assessments that many of us do already with clinical education models and things of that nature. So we have a quick poll to kind of get things started. So Glenn or Bryce, if you've launched the first poll, I'll give you 20, 30 seconds to respond to questions 1 and 2 through 3. Cast your vote. There's 3 questions there. First one is regards to programmatic assessment. Do you consider yourself novice, intermediate, and expert? Wow, interesting blend of novices and intermediates. Interesting. Any formal training or toggling between getting close to 50-50, which is interesting and predictable. And any formal training, academic degree, about a third or so have formal training. A very small percentage have gone to professional conference, and a very small percent have done online, self-taught, and not applicable. Wow, so that's kind of what I anticipated. So that's great data to have. So we got about 83% of votes. Give you another 8-9 seconds to cast your vote. Okay, so 85%. Great information. It's kind of what I anticipated. So good. I've designed a program that I think will address a little bit of everything for everybody. So if we close that poll, share the results. Oh, I can do that. Okay. Very nice. Okay. So as we said, we're in a competency-based or CBE world, especially based off medical education. Those of us who are coming out of AT education in the United States know that our current capital is a mixture of proficiencies and competencies and integrated clinical proficiencies, which sometimes gets confusing to figure out what's what and what are you going to measure and what are you going to report. Most places use competencies in some manner. You know, if you're looking at the new 2020 standards that have come out and they're effective this summer in a month or so, the CATI has boiled them up or down, depending on which way you look at it, to 6 core competencies, of course, each having multiple sub-levels and details with, you know, KSAs, knowledge, skills, and attitude germane to each. Obviously, there's a lot of integration there. EVP is obviously integrated patient care and whatnot, and you could go deeper and dive into those as much as you'd like. But there is a challenge to if you start with these 6 core competencies. To me, is how do you make these 6 things your end game, your programmatic outcomes, your targets, your goals? Certainly, you can. You could could have sub-measures and metrics for each of them. You could have 10, 12, 15 metrics or measures for each of them and add them up in some way to equate or come to the point of saying our program is adept at producing students who meet core competency related to professionalism, et cetera. So there's lots of ways to get there. So one of the caveats to this conversation, though, is that there is no such thing as a perfect system or method for assessment. There are multiple variables. So we're going to try to introduce some different ways of doing that. So competency versus capability. Again, this is not really a semantic thing to me, but it's not an old thing either. So competencies, for people who are looking at competencies from the outside and being a little more critical, and again, the medical educators from med school folks that were a little frustrated with, producing technically sound and accomplished students and physicians, but maybe missing some of the deeper, more cognitive, metacognitive skills that relate to expertise, that relate to adaptive expertise. That relate to higher level performance. So, you look at competencies, and they're not always are, but they can be boiled down to very safe, right? They're safe environment between a preceptor and a student. They're structured. There's guidelines. They're very prescriptive in nature. And those of us who as students had checklists, or maybe our programs use checklists in some nature, that's kind of the bumper sticker critique of competencies, that they can easily and often are boiled down to checklists. And if it's a checklist, then therefore it's very predictable. It's very linear demonstration of learning. So again, key, and Fraser and Greenhall came out with this way back almost 20 years ago, and calling competencies somewhat limited if you're not careful, and that they can turn out to be very linear, very reductionist forms of learning. And the other critique with competencies is that students are smart. They figure out what the competency is. So they kind of hit the bar and they stop there. Once they've learned the competency, check, they've hit these 10, 12 competencies, check, they kind of are okay with it. There's a critique there that it doesn't extend into the realm of context and to advanced practice, because they've already met the bar. In contrast, capabilities, a couple different quotes that describe it well. The first one, all the way back to 1998, it's an all-around integration of knowledge, skills, and personal qualities used appropriately and effectively. And even more strongly, again, Fraser and Greenhall came up with a better way to situate capabilities, and challenging med educators to say education for capability must focus on students' construction of their own learning, receiving feedback, reflecting, and organizing their knowledge and experience, and avoiding goals with very rigid and prescriptive content. Simply put, trying to project competency into the future. And in athletic training education, the reason why I really came about the capability, and we've adapted it in our program, is, our education on paper is the same. The curriculum is pretty similar. The experiences are pretty similar. The standards are all being followed to assure quality and comprehensiveness. But in the end, we don't really control the exposures our students have. So even though a student may learn, for example, all the details about the mechanisms and the assessment and the rehab and the return to play criteria, let's say for an ACL reconstruction, well, it's still pretty random as to how many students get to experience all of that from beginning to end. It's pretty low percentage, actually. And if you think about that with heat stroke and commotio cordis and anaphylactic shock and diabetic emergencies, all of the things in our content and curriculum, they learn pretty much, at various levels and depths, depending on the program, culture, and values and focus, but they don't experience those things. So to me, the best way to situate capability as a more apt moniker or target for our students is the amount of stuff our students have to be educated in and capable of handling. And capability, to me, implies more of a futuristic component. Are they capable of addressing and handling something well in a competent manner? And so they're not exclusive from each other. Are they capable of handling something that they've learned but haven't experienced? To me, that's what I lose sleep at night. Also, what excites me as a program director and as an educator is, can we educate our students to address things, to do things competently after they graduate, when they're practicing on their own, that they haven't yet experienced but they've learned? And to me, that's what capability captures. Fraser and Greenhall captured it even better towards the end of the article back in 2001. In today's complex world, we must educate not merely for competence. Again, there's the interrelationship. They're not exclusive to each other, but for the ability to adapt to change, generate new knowledge, continuous performance enhancement. And that last part after the hyphen is critical. We know in studies of clinical expertise in medicine that some of the characteristics about clinical experts are, number one, the ability to adapt. Nicole Woods and Maya Myopoulos at the Wilson Center, Toronto, for example, have a couple great papers on adaptive expertise. When I say adaptive expertise, it's the ability to know when to adapt to a context of a situation, whether you adapt an assessment protocol, you modify a special test, or you adapt a rehab protocol or something that students learn based on the context of the situation. Number one is experts are lifelong learners. They generate new knowledge. They invent not only solutions to problems, but they invent and can perceive problems ahead of time. They know when there's a problem there. They recognize it quicker. And secondly, they're lifelong learners. And thirdly, they think and reflect and use metacognition. Right? So they do their own internal continuous performance assessment through reflection and assessment of their strengths and weaknesses, their mistakes and their successes. So interestingly, within this definition of capability are many of the known traits of clinical expertise. So those are the reasons why we decided to go to capability. So our first meta moment in the Q&A section, Glenn, do we agree? Right?
It was going to be the chat section.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Bryce. So in the chat section, please take about 30 seconds to list one-word descriptors that you have that now kind of describe capability. So either based on what I talked about, the definitions, go ahead and take some time to write some one-word descriptors that you think meet the definition of capability, especially from a clinical context. I'll give you 30 seconds or so. Okay, so what are some of the words we have there, Glenn, if you can read some off for us?
Yeah, we've got lots and lots of contributions here. So adaptable, dynamic, critical thinking, preparedness, proficiency, adaptable, I think I might have said that already, foundational expertise, functionality, mastery, readiness, support, lifelong, power to do, reflection, trust, critical thinking,
Great.
And decision making.
Great. A lot of good stuff. So flexible, adaptable, creative, confident, competent, systematic or systems-based, complex, chaotic, right? Things aren't as safe and maybe unknown. Novel, transferability. Can you transfer what you've learned into a real life situation? Duress. Can students work under stress? First time they go out and all of a sudden they see a commotio cordis, can they handle that? Because obviously a simulation of that event, though valuable, in a clinical or classroom context is very safe and not as stressful. Again, there's some value in simulation labs, which those of you folks who have simulation labs can obviously do this as well. So nice, great stuff. So this is also, Neve and Hanks in 2016 medical education piece came out with this great paper, just simply said, when I say capability, and kind of elaborating on it. And this is just one great quote from it. You don't have to read the whole thing, it'll take too long, but just look at the words in green that are more forward thinking and more positive and more paradigm changing kind of words and solutions. And then the red one, kind of the negatives: linear learning, separate assessments, prescriptive and minutiae and those kinds of things. And they kind of equated this to Master Chef or Chopped, right? Where these highly successful and accomplished chefs come into these shows and they're given a totally different context and a lot of duress, right? They're given ingredients that don't match on Chopped in a basket. They're given time pressure. It has to look good, it has to taste good, and they're competing against people next to them. So Chopped is probably the best example of a capability, right? The winners of Chopped are people that are highly capable chefs. They can expand their skill set under novel situations, under duress, and put 2 + 2 + 2 together and come out with 6 more often than not. So at Ithaca College, as I said, we moved to capabilities about 4 years ago. And these are the updated ones as we moved into 2020 with the new content. And I'm not going to take time to read them all, but you see there's capable written every single one of them. And we've broken down to 9 major domains, if you will. And you also see, if we just look at number 3, for example, here, you see my cursor, diagnostic reasoning and management, orthopedic. And you see, for example, we've separated that out from a gen med and orthopedic standpoint, just so that we can clearly trace those more from a programmatic assessment. But you see the definition: capable of, and listing the various things involved in a musculoskeletal world, using EBP, right? And of course, in respective to into professional practice. So you can also see that this is not just a reductionist, can you evaluate knees, shoulders, and backs kind of thing. This is also bringing in EBP when appropriate, whether that's diagnostic reasoning evidence or whether that's therapeutic interventions, rehab protocols, et cetera, for MSK conditions. And then IPE. So what we've done is we've updated these to reflect the latest information in the standards, to make them integrated and hopefully make them trackable or measurable. So you'll see this come out a little bit more as we show you some of the work that we've done with our programmatic assessment. Harvard Medici Institute is a great place, a great source. I have it listed in the back under resources, as well as the Wilson Center at Toronto. But their simple model for programmatic assessment, again, you can digest this at your own. You can go online and find it. But one of the things you see here, if you digest this graphic, is a lot of the same words: integrated, context, individualized or individual components, data analysis, meaning numerous forms of data analysis and sources, informing both the student and the program, organizational learning and continuous quality improvement, capabilities is actually listed in there, capabilities of graduates, desired outcomes, and of course tracking and then progress. So a lot of the same keywords that you see in the texts and the narrative and the journal articles about capability. A very similar model, and I apologize, I failed to record the source of this image I got a couple years ago, and I've looked everywhere for it. I even did the old Google thing where you put the picture in and see if it finds it, and it didn't work. So first time Google's failed me. But this model is similar yet a little bit different, so I don't have a citation for it, but it's not mine, to be clear. But again, if you kind of do a macro analysis of this model, you see the same words: systemic, numerous puzzle pieces. You see represented visually here. You see alignment in several places of the puzzle pieces, are things aligned together versus all disparate and separate parts. You see feedback. You see the word system or systematic right at the top. You see design, which means it's intentionally designing things. You see integrated, and you see the word outcome, of course. And then you see informing the program, you see continuous quality improvement. So a lot of the same themes are represented in this model as well. And these are two models that we've used in our program to try to do better and make more meaning of our programmatic work. Okay, Glenn, if you could launch Quick Strike poll number 2. There's two more questions for you folks to address. I'll give you 20, 30 seconds to do that. In regards to program assessment, do you consider yourself oh, that was the old one. So do you have formal training? Here we go. Okay. So about 75 to 80% have intentionable and articulatable formative assessment structure, and the numbers are about the same. So aside from track and BOC, RD exam scores, does your home program require administrative summative assessment? So about 2/3, 3/4 to the affirmatory, and about 1/3 to negative. So it's about what I would predict. So good, about 1/4 to 1/3 of people don't necessarily have great stuff. Okay, good. So that'll help us moving forward as well. Thank you for that. Okay. 71%, 70%. Okay, good. So formative assessment. Again, I apologize if you're well versed in this, but again, we found out that some aren't. So, right, formative assessment is basically assessment for learning, right? The evaluation of student learning while the learning is still taking place. So given that definition, the evaluation of student learning while the learning is still taking place, we have another meta moment. So using the Q&A section, use one-word descriptors of examples, not descriptors, one-word examples of formative artifacts or ways that you collect formative data for your assessment plan. So go ahead.
It's using the chat.
Yep, sorry, using the chat. I'm sorry, I keep mixing it up. So using the chat, go ahead and list things that you, in your program or your class, so either as an instructor of record for a course or in your program, that you use for formative assessment. Give another 15 seconds or so for that. And we'll ask Glenn to share some themes.
Yeah, so we've got practical exams, course assignments, quizzes, debriefing, weekly quizzes. Somebody says Kahoot, simulations, VVOX, skill testing, test discussions, peer-based learning, Mentimeter, exams, standardized patients, preceptor feedback, standardized patient experiences, mid-semester. So, yep, and logbooks, another one.
Okay, so we got a mixture of old school, if you will, kind of classic, exams and OPs and things of that nature. We've got some technology-driven, platform-driven, app-driven things like Kahoot and others, and we've got some personal things like personal feedback with precepts. So some great examples there. So here's a couple of things that weren't mentioned very much in there because they were all specific examples. But so these are more descriptors in general of formative, typically no stakes to low stakes, right? So for example, an exam, if an exam is half of a grade or 25% of a grade, then it's not necessarily by some considered to be a formative, especially given that oftentimes, even though our intentions might be good, we probably don't give as much feedback after exams or quizzes other than passing them out and going over things. But very, very rarely do we have one-on-one feedback, but if you do, good. So no to low stakes. They can be formal or informal, like Kahoot is informal, often within class, stuff like that. It can be very deliberate or undeliberate, can be progress driven, can be specific, can be local, can be contextual, and obviously the key is feedback driven. Now, the alternative or the opposite on the other end of the spectrum is summative assessment or assessment of learning. And assessment of learning is a practice of evaluating when a student has learned at the end of a given period of time. So those of you who said earlier that you have summative assessment measures in your program, for example, a student must take an exit exam at the end of the spring senior semester or whatever your last term is. Obviously, all of us either have an RD exam or a BOC exam or the Canadian AT exam, athletic therapy exam. So obviously, students have a summative assessment test that they take in order to practice. And our students do as well, but it's not required. Students take it at the college, and we don't have them. They don't have to pass it to graduate. So those of you who have summative assessment measures in your program, what are things that you folks use? So now we have a meta moment. What are things that you guys use as summative assessment measures in your program? Give you another 15, 20 seconds to respond to that one. And maybe some of the same answers, right? So there's not a clear delineation between artifacts that we use for formative. Some may be used dually. Okay, what do we have for some themes, Glenn?
So we have milestones, OSCEs, final practical exam, mock patient exams, SP cases, simulated patients, comprehensive exams at the end of the semester, practice BOC exam, capstone exams, practical simulations, exit surveys, and looking for something different here. Most of them exit interviews. Yep, most preceptor evaluation would be a little different. Oh, we have an alumni and employer surveys.
Okay. So again, for classic summative assessment, a lot of good examples there. For classic summative assessment, right, they're typically, first of all, classically, they're high stakes, right? So if there's no stakes involved, if you're collecting data on your program, like exit exams and surveys and ratings of things, those aren't classic summative. Those are artifacts that you collect for programmatic assessment, but they're not summative assessment of student learning per se. So typically, classically, high stakes exams are less frequent. They're very time consuming, right? Those of you who mentioned OSCEs and standardized patients, they're very time consuming. They're resource intensive, whether it's a number of evaluators or clinical facility space to set up stations or videotaping or training and paying of standardized patients, right? Those things all have great value and give you a lot of information and can give students great feedback. But a classic summative doesn't give a lot of feedback. The student has to meet a certain mark. There's benchmarks involved. There's grades given. It's some critics of summative assessment call it judgment based. You're giving a judgment. Here you passed or you failed. Here's your A. Here's your B. Here's your C. And they're usually related to outcomes. X percentage of our students pass this OSCE exam indicating X and Z. So again, there's a lot of in-between space, and some people listed things there that are more are assessments of programs, students' opinions of the program, how it went, how they think it went. Job ratings and graduation rates are indirect measures of student learning. So those are all things that we use, but we're going to move forward a little bit into getting a little deeper into weeds, if you will. So it is an often used an example to describe the difference between formative and summative. Formative, the chef can alter the end outcome of the soup by adding more salt or more pepper, or stewing it slower, or adding more broth if it's getting too thick, chicken stock, etc. Versus when we show up and pay for something and order soup, if it's not very good, it's going to be probably a long time before we come back to that restaurant and order that soup again. And we have very little methodology to affect that soup being better unless we walk back in the kitchen and tell the chef what we thought of the soup. So that's a quick little way to remember. Now, formative assessment, AKA assessment for learning, is really where we're going to spend more of our time here. It's really where more of the conversation in medical education and health professions education is moving, is away from the over-reliance on summative, judgment-based measures that give very little to the actual learning process, especially as it's happening. So one way of thinking of it is we'd like to create an opportunity for a guided journey at the bottom. You pay for a tour in the ancient streets of Rome, you pay your fee, you show up at a certain time. Before you pay for that, you've looked online, you see you're going to stop at all these places, you're going to see how long it is, you're going to see when you stop for lunch, you need to know how much money you have, you need to have comfortable shoes. And as you go on a tour, the expert tour guide tells you everything you need to know about the Colosseum and the Parthenon. And no, scores, Parthenon is not in Rome, so it shows you some ignorance, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the tour, you conceivably get what you paid for, because it was very structured and very detailed, and you had a starting point and an end point, versus a magical mystery tour. And I think it's a great way to consider a lot of what we've done, and at least my experiences in education in America, and I did it for probably the first 10, 12 years of my career as a program director, is kind of a magical mystery tour. And what I mean by that is you rely on the curriculum. Here's our curriculum, here's our scope, here's our sequence, prereqs, coreqs. You have to have C- or better in these classes. You have to have GPA of X, Y, or Z in order to be retained. And you have to pass all of these classes and achieve all these benchmarks and clinical proficiencies and hours and all these things that makes programs unique. And then if you come in as a freshman and you leave as a senior and you meet all of those things, you graduate, you complete our degree, basically that's the magical mystery tour. You're here, you're at the end of the ride. Here, take the BOC exam. We think you're prepared. You take it, you pass it, or you don't pass it, and you move forward. So that's kind of the magical mystery tour, is that the student just is paying us, and hoping that they have a great ride and they end up where they want to be at the end. So what we'd like to do is convert our mindset to programmatic assessment. And it's a little different focus than just calling it, program outcomes, right? Which are a lot of different things, including the surveys and the opinion pieces and the perception pieces from our students and our other parties, employers and supervisors and those things. Those all give you valuable information. I'm not demeaning those. What I'm trying to do, though, is refocus a little bit on a more authentic and meaningful programmatic assessment. And in order to have programmatic assessment, you need to create a guided tour to a desired destination. So this programmatic assessment, according to Kees van der Vleuten, the director of the Medical and Health Professions Education Program at Maastricht University in the Netherlands, who offers a great course to the European Board of Medical Assessors every spring and fall. I think there's twice a year, but I went in the fall 2 years ago. It was an amazing learning experience, and you'll see his name a lot in the literature coming up. He described it very simply, that programmatic assessment incorporates both the assessment for and of learning. It doesn't prioritize either or, but it integrates them. And they all make the argument to the scholars in this field that this is what it should look like. The formative assessment should be more of your attention, more of your focus than summative assessment. And then at the end of the day, right, when you're looking at your programmatic assessment plan, that your formative assessment is adding up to your summative. In other words, a guided journey to a known destination. So here's the aforementioned Case van der Vleuten, by the way, who teaches that course, who's there every day for it. So this is a great piece to start with. This is 4 or 5 years old now. Programmatic approach to assessment. It's it's only about 9-10 pages, but it is a good overview of shifting away from the long-held. Again, this is coming from medical education, which I think we in AT can learn a lot from, which I have. But that's kind of one of the subversive points here is to start stealing from those who've done it for a long time and just adapting or bending it and molding it to our field. Is kind of getting away from this learning-oriented view. That's been, the behaviorist approach of master-oriented. Here, you've got a 3.5. You've passed all these classes. You've checked all the boxes. You're done. X number of students do this. X number of students do that, and move along. Versus a more of a constructivist view on education, where we resonate well with the notion of what competency-based is. So we're not kicking competency-based education aside. We're just refocusing how we track it and assess it and alter our approach to both the design of the curriculum and the delivery of the curriculum, which I think have to go hand in hand. You can't just drop a scope and sequence. You also have to have an operating system, if you will. How are you going to deliver it? And then therefore, how are you going to know and make those updates to the software? This is the second article I'd highly recommend that you read. This one's a little longer. It's a lot more detail, but from kind of Pasek and Ricchini and Krupat came out just a little bit ago. It's newer, but it's very, very detailed. And not to bore you to death or give you too much information, but what you're going to see here is, there's a lot of these same words here of how to build a formative, focused assessment, integrated, comprehensive, and coordinated system, be complementary to the summative system. So you're not kicking one aside. And mapping a system should be purposeful, right? A lot of feedback, right? A variety of sources. So looking at qualitative and quantitative sources, realizing that narrative information that preceptors give you or your students is an important part of your assessment program. Have local and global accountability. It's a continuous process over the entire tenure in the program at multiple points in time. The responsibility on students and teacher, and so it's creating a relationship that both all parties are involved in the improvement. And again, there's an organic and ongoing relationship. Down here, we have to teach our students how to use and feedback and receive it, and therefore we also have to. Sorry for the overlaps. I made my cursor big so you can see it better. A little fatter pen there, but we also have to teach our faculty, which we all do well with preceptor training programs, but also from the standpoint of moving our faculty forward. So a lot of the same words there, right? So same article, different table, right? So, but you see that there is also here, go back to my highlighter, right? It's developmental. Somebody mentioned earlier using milestones. So if you're familiar with the competencies, milestones, and EPA's model of medical education. So as we transform and continue moving forward, we've had capabilities for years now. Now as we move into next year, we're putting milestones in as the stepping stone before capabilities. So have measurable, delineated stepping stones to your end game, in our case towards capabilities. So have markers and milestones, kind of like the guided tour. When are you going to stop to go to the bathroom? When are you going to stop to eat? When are you going to stop to look at the Roman Colosseum? Excuse me. Be very learner centered, right? Instead of just from the top, summatively expecting students to get there. Improvement focused. Self-reflection. Again, experts we know reflect and use metacognition as a habit, as a daily habit to take responsibility for the continued learning, right? A broad range of assessment data. Aggregate your data and collect all your sources, your OP exams, your quizzes, your proficiencies, your preceptor ratings, subjective ratings, self-ratings, etc. Really important, regularly scheduled feedback, which has always been a problem with EMs and OP exams, and giving them specific one-on-one feedback. This feedback again. Provide learners with directions, right? So deliberate practice, not just practice. You give them deliberate directions how to improve. You give them sources. You give them specific targets to meet versus, hey, you got to do better with your palpation skills. And then, of course, the teachers just involved just as well. We also have to have the teachers self-reflect on what's their role in making everything they do a formative-based aspect of the larger programmatic assessment versus just what's going on in my class or in my lab or in my clinical experience. So there has to be an integration between your didactic, your lab-based components of your curriculum, your clinical-based components of your curriculum. I like to present it this way. Like you have different software, right? You have PowerPoint, you have Excel, you have Word, et cetera, times 100. Each one of those software programs is a class or a lab or something that you meet regularly. And then, of course, there's also one of those big software programs is the clinical experience. And as you can have multiple different softwares if you wanted to break that out into all of the expanses of clinical education. Well, what's the operating system? And so I've done a couple external reviews of programs, and the number one thing we've talked about with those programs is what is your operating system, or what is your glue? What connects your class to didactic to your clinical? What connects all of your professors, your core faculty, your clinical faculty together? In our case, it's clinical reasoning, which is a combination of diagnostic reasoning, therapeutic reasoning, and contextual reasoning. So when we identify a problem, a weakness, a gap in student learning based on certain measures, we can come back to, is it a diagnostic reasoning problem? Is it a therapeutic reasoning problem? Is it a contextual reasoning problem? And that's our operating system. And that's that connects the various software that make up our curriculum. So here's Kees van der Vleuten again and colleagues. This would be the fourth paper that I would highly recommend you read. Again, it's a chapter, so it is fairly long, but this would probably be if you really want to start and kind of hit a home run, if you will, or get as many things addressed as you can, especially if you're a novice to an intermediate in assessment. This would be the one, chapter 28. And it goes over a lot of detail about the history of CBE and how it relates to assessment and medicine in particular. And then it goes over a lot more detail of formative, which you see kind of encapsulated over here on the right-hand side of the triangle, in assessment of learning, summative over here. And of course, what he really, to me, is, I don't know if this is accurate, but kind of the father of assessment as learning, because the last 4, 5, 6 years, this theme of assessment as learning has come out in a lot of his papers, and it's just this kind of repositioning the assessment of and for, and you see assessment is here on top of the triangle. That's on purpose. Again, some of the themes you see here are results are information rich. Decision making is based off of analysis of a lot of data that's aggregated, that's very, very rich. Students and teachers are together in this process. It's not just a student, excuse me, it's just not a faculty or an administrator thing. Right, there's the relationship involved, right? And then of course the strategies of formative assessment are used to enhance student learning, not just to brag about student program outcomes on a web page or an accreditation report or to your dean or your provost. So it's more about approaching student learning. So this, going back to this Konopasek article, sorry if I mispronounced that, Konopasek. When practicing summative assessment, I think it's a good way to look at it. We're acting more as regulators, right? X percentage of our students have to earn X kind of grade on artifact X, Y, or Z, right? You have to have, in order to graduate, in order to move forward, in order to stay in the program, in order to be eligible for, right? All of those carry or add-ons that we have, right? The educator's role by an implementation of formative assessment is different, right? It's more about what it means to be an educator. It's to impart information and instill values and inspire excellence and ongoing learning. So that's the great way to consider assessment as learning. And again, going back to van der Vleuten, a programmatic approach where assessment of and for learning emerge. So it's really this hybridization and parallel but intentional and strategic integration of the summative and formative practices that you already have in place, and then by doing that, you might see what's missing, right? So by taking things and putting together and figure out where you want to go with your students and with your program, you purposefully select different artifacts, and maybe you'll add some, maybe you'll delete some, maybe you realize that things like, for example, exit surveys, even though they give you a little bit of information, we do those and I look at them, but they're pretty consistent year to year. They don't really help me inform deeper, authentic programmatic change. Supervisor ratings, same thing, because the context is so different, whether they're GA or at a high school and their AD is evaluating them, or they're in a grad program and they have an experienced clinician evaluating them. So the nature of the relationship between evaluator and evaluatee is often limited. Again, these are my experiences. I'm not saying throw the baby with the bathwater, but the focus here on assessment as learning is a focus on intended positive effect on learning. So quick strike poll number 6, Glenn, if you'd be so kind to launch that. Now that we've given you a little bit of different ideas and thinking about your current AT program's comprehensive assessment plan, how do you describe it?
Oh, hang on. That's the right one, right?
There we go. Yep. Really interesting. Wow. Give me a few more seconds to chime in. Good. So about 10% are admitting it's probably a magical mystery tour. About 25%, it's only about a quarter, have a real specific formative assessment as learning. The majority, about half, a little bit of both, which is probably pretty true. And then 13 are unsure. So really interesting results there. Good. So hopefully giving some great information to go forward. Okay. So assessment as learning, there's basically these 2 articles. Again, I'm not going to spend time going on to them, but they are in the reference list in the back that you'll get, that I'll be able to forward to you if you'd like when we get your contact information. But basically these articles dial into the tension, right, between the old school summative based, again, med schools have to pass level 1, level 2, right? So a lot of this, remember the context, they're coming back from the level 1s, level 2s. They also have to pass OSCEs in order to advance. So those of you who have old school summative assessment aspects of your program where they are high stakes, they have to pass or reach a metric or a benchmark in order to advance in the program. Really a lot to think about as far as how you might redesign your programmatic assessment. Those of you who are starting out and launching a new program or adapting to the master's degree, a lot of opportunity to build something new as well. So moving into how we do some things to give you some take-home skills. So progress testing within classes. So the other thing is we've done is we break out micro versus macro. So we asked you earlier about things you guys do as formative and summative measures, and you had a lot of great stuff in class examples. So thinking about it micro, what are you doing in your class, right? So when you do one of those polls, those online polls, when you do 1-minute papers and all these little techniques a lot of us have learned or invented to get feedback to see how class is going, right? I call that kind of micro. So when you're doing stuff within your class, you know, they're no stakes, they're feedback driven. You're trying to gauge where they are so you can see if you're getting towards your SLOs for that class, of course. And of course you can give them direct feedback and then hopefully you change your teaching, right? If certain gaps are identified. So we started using Microsoft Forms a lot this year. Again, I have no stock, at least that I know of in my 401k maybe, but I have no vested concerted investment or interest in Microsoft. I just discovered Microsoft Forms this year. And we started using them a little bit before the COVID-19 breakout, and then a lot of it once the COVID-19 breakout, we went to online remote asynchronous learning because the literature was clear suggesting that once you go online, you need more formative feedback. So in my assessment class, the last half of assessment 2, I made 5 different progress tests, 2 on the shoulder, 2 on the lumbar thoracic spine, and 1 on the cervical spine as we move through the semester. And they're quick and easy to make and you get data from and give direct feedback to the students. You can go question by question feedback. They get their overall score. They get a report that says how they did. And then I have the group data that I can then share with the group or with my class or with myself and look at it. And this is just an example, a quick screenshot of a SLAP lesion, for example. And then you can use pictures, you can use videos, you can use scenarios, you can really do anything you want. You just want to assess their anatomy, you want to just do a hardcore pillar knowledge of anatomy and physiology relative to the shoulder complex, you can do that as well. So this is an example of a micro progress test that's quick and easy to do using Microsoft Forms, and that we use without class, and a couple of my other faculty did those as well. This, in contrast, is more of using progress testing for macro progress. So these are units that we developed in using Forms, again, that can be used either as formative, right, purely for feedback for students to direct their learning, identify gaps, see where they are on the spectrum towards capabilities, which we do. They can also be used as summative assessments if you wanted to, as either pure exit exam measures to say our students achieved a score of X, Y, and Z in these different domains. Here you see one, therapeutic interventions 1, which is pretty much physical modalities based. And here down here, you see another screenshot of one on healthcare administration professionalism. So you can use these in multiple ways. We use them as both. We use them as formative feedback for the students as they start to prepare, as they advance through their senior year and start to prepare for the BOC exam and how they direct their studies, because we don't do review classes. And we also use them as program outcomes to see what we need to do to change next year going forward. Do we need to emphasize more of this and less of that? Do we need to dive in deeper to certain things? Do we need to change the way we deliver it? So these can be matched with the curricular space and the timing. They inform the program, the teaching curriculum as well. And they do the same things as the micro ones do. They inform student learning. Most of these are given without studying or preparation, right? So there is a lot of literature suggests that given progress testing is difficult because if there isn't a grade to it, some students don't want any part of it. They're not going to study for it. They're not going to do their best. You do have to seek student effort as best you can, but they don't know. They know they're doing a progress test. They come in and they open up their computers and I send them this link and they take the exam. So it's literally a stone cold assessment on, for example, February 5th of where they are on therapy interventions 1. So there's no preparation for these progress tests, and they get feedback right away of how well they did, and they know the context of it. Oops, skip to. So next meta moment is, in your own words, what does assessment as learning mean or signify? So use one-word descriptors, take 20, 30 seconds. So what do you think assessment as learning means or signifies to you at this point? Another 10, 12, 15 seconds or so, and then we'll have Glenn read us off some common themes he sees. Okay, Glenn, if you'd be so kind, what do we have?
Okay, I've got progress, retain knowledge, continuous improvement, identify gaps, journey, growth, progression, accomplishment, extra tool to learn, enhanced feedback, how is your learning going, co-learning, new thinking, discovery, honesty, evolution, contextual assessment, draw student attention to areas of improvement, deficit improvement, reflection, understanding, and healthcare center.
Great, great. Some great responses. Yeah, integrated, it's formative, it's student-centered, it's progressive. It should be regular, right? So students get the hang of it and get used to it. And the feedback, by the way, from the students was fantastic. They loved this. They really feel like they're on a guided tour, not on a magical mystery tour. By the way, those 9 clinical capabilities, I failed to mention this, that I showed you quickly earlier, the students get a copy of that at the beginning of the sophomore year. So again, that's the brochure that you would get for the guided tour of ancient Rome. And they know that that's where they're going. And then we reassess and we talk about these all the way from sophomore year to the end of the senior year. And there's a post on the big color poster in our clinic in our clinical classroom. So they're everywhere. Those capability targets are like road signs, stop, go, yield, etc. No stakes, intentional, targeted, very specific, they're programmatically designed, they're individualized, right? Because students know that, for example, in psychosocial one, if they don't have a lot of experience yet because of where they are clinically, they know that, okay, the score probably going to be a little bit low because they know what their exposure rates are, right? That they've been exposed to this kind of case or that kind of case. So they also know the context of that as well. So you can do different things, and I apologize, the screenshot's a little small here, but I want to keep the number of slides to a minimum, but you can do a lot of different things, both with Qualtrics and with forums, and I'm learning more and more each time I go at it, but you can do extended multiple, well, what you see here, for example, is you can do short fill in the blank. What you see at the top. You can do a multiple choice with one or all best answers. You can do short answer. And again, when you go into the fill in the blank or the short answer, you can grade it yourself by hand. You can set up for the multiple choice to be graded automatically. Jim Schilling at Northern Arizona University did a great paper, published a great paper in JAT, I think 2 years ago now, feels like 2 years ago, on extended match questions. And he introduced the reader to some of the basic science behind item writing, which is a whole nother thing, right? Item writing and blueprinting, but item writing and some of the best evidence behind writing good questions. And then talked about how you can write extended match questions. And this here is an example of an extended match question that you can do through the text function of using the Microsoft Quiz. And then you can do scenario-based, problem-based. Again, you can enter the scenario and then set up a series of questions and provide video links and pictures, whether it's a general medical or an acute care or an MOI, which I'll show you in a second. You can actually assess a lot of different interrelated aspects of clinical practice. And again, assessing their capabilities. If you're getting into these, to the extended match and to the problem-based ones, case pattern presentation ones, where you're actually assessing their diagnostic reasoning and their decision-making. And you can also assess the rationale behind their reasoning making based on the way you set questions, based on how you set questions up. But you can assess diagnostic reasoning and therapeutic reasoning. There is evidence in the literature to support the ability to use virtual formats like this to validly assess diagnostic reasoning and decision-making. And of course, you can do the old-fashioned knowledge, skills, and attitude. You can make it as basic as you want. So when we took a programmatic assessment in the senior year, and we're killing multiple birds with one stone, if you will, we're using these integrated clinical capabilities. In this case, you see an assessment, diagnostic reasoning. And there's a scenario here. In this case, it's one where someone looks like an MOI. You get a very clear look at it. So there's a video clip here of a basketball player rolling his ankle. Right? It's a classic basketball player goes up, comes down, and laterally rolls, inverts his ankle, the classic ankle sprain mechanism. And you can take your students through a scenario to ask them for the DDX. You can ask them for evidence-based, for example, to cite the auto ankle rules as part of your assessment. You can ask them specific details about those things, and you can take them from beginning to end, all the way to rehab, to return to play. So we've developed a battery of integrated clinical capability modules. And I was actually going to present this at the EBMA conference in Glasgow, Scotland in September. I got accepted to present the data from this, but the course got canceled. And so I'll be doing online somewhere next year, details to be TBA. But you see here an orthopedic one, and over here, scenario 4 was a gen med one. Actually, obviously, you see the answer here is being myocarditis, so you can set up case patterns, and you can add pictures or not, you can add video or not, and students have to read through the scenarios and recognize key features, discern relevant from irrelevant, and you can go all the way from beginning to end, and you get detailed data reports. These articles support the evidence, these 4 articles that are in the references on using technology like Qualtrics and Microsoft Forms to assess clinical reasoning. So in different types of questioning. So there is a battery of evidence out there that supports the validity of doing so and gives you some guidelines of how best to do it. Again, there's aspects of item writing and learning analytics involved, which is a little bit beyond the scope of today's talk, but it is fun to learn how to do, and the evidence is what it is. You can tweak and access and improve things year to year. If you have a camera, go ahead and take a picture of that thing on the left. I forgot what they're called, but take a look at that, and you'll see something will pop up that looks like, I did this right, it looks like this. So here's an example. Oh, that's not good. Here's an example of what it looks like. So here's an MS form. I just did a sample for us today. We're not going to take time to go through it, but as soon as the student enters, their name is recorded. You can make it anonymous too. You can see an example of a multiple choice question, number 1. You see an example of an extended match question, another extended match question, which I put on purpose because it shows you use the same set of answers. And up here, you see the question here is dialed in towards the infraspinatus, and you use the same setup down here. You ask a different question, so you don't have to keep repeating your distractors in your answers. That's the beauty of extended matches. And again, you can set it up to record and grade. Here you have a picture of a dislocated patella. You can ask about diagnostic reasoning based on observation. You create a new section so that students can't go back and change their answer. So this same scenario continued. Now I'm asking some follow-up questions about patellofemoral instability. So now you're asking about MOI, you're asking about tissue pathology, a little bit of EBP, asking for a special test. Some reason this picture didn't show up, but sometimes that's a quirky thing where you just have to
wonder if, Paul, if you could maybe just give them a more chance to take a picture.
There you go. Yep. So you can see there's a special test picture. We're bringing in some diagnostic accuracy data here and seeing if they understand the difference between sensitivity and specificity and how to interpret those. You can enter their answer and you can code those and grade them real quickly and give direct feedback when the students miss. Okay. You use a different section to go on and move to a different part of the exam. Here we have another scenario asking them to assess key features of the case, relevant from irrelevant, and formulate differential diagnosis based on the age and the sport and the chief complaint, etc. And then here you see, here's that basketball video I showed you earlier. A student can watch the video, and then you bring them to a differential diagnosis process and the list of questions. And then when you do that, right, you can click on each individual response and go through. You can post the scores once you're happy with them. You can download the scores in Excel. Right, and we use Microsoft Teams. If anybody else uses that, again, a Microsoft theme. Again, I have no vested interest in Microsoft, but then I can take the group results and post them, in this case, to the seniors. These are the results of the psychosocial strategies integrated module. You can see clearly 100% got the first little scenario. We have basically 10 or 12 scenarios dealing with psychosocial health and wellness. And of course, the students already have their private score now, and they have their private feedback. Now they can see how they did compared to the others. And again, I can post this data to a different team. So this is a team, and this is the channels within a team. But I also have a team for AT faculty. So I'll go on the AT faculty page and I'll post these scores. And then at our next faculty meeting, we talk about outcomes. We go over, and everybody can look at them ahead of time or during the meeting. And I say, hey guys, you know, we failed miserably on this integrated module. We need to fix this. So real easy shareability of the data once it's completed. If
Paul?
you have your, yep.
Well, can I just interrupt you? Can you go back to the QR again so that they can take another picture of it? I think some of them didn't have time to do that.
Sure. There you go. QR code, that's the name. I have trouble remembering that. Okay, so you get a snapshot.
Great,
of
that should be good, I think.
Okay. So now we use Qualtrics a lot. Now Qualtrics is a lot more sophisticated, but it's more for surveys and stuff. And the thing I like about Teams is the automatic grading that you get, especially if you make a real simple quiz. You can get automatic grade, point values and percentages in a heartbeat, and you don't have a lot of work to do. But if you make a more sophisticated exam, then you have more to do, but it's still very valuable because you provide instant feedback question by question. It's the other major advantage of Teams. You can provide student by student feedback question by question. So in addition to an overall score that they get, you can give them direct, hey, do you remember we said in class that this is that and this is this, and don't forget X, Y, Z. You can do that as much as you want to on every single question on a quiz you make in Microsoft Teams. Qualtrics doesn't have that capability that I know of. Maybe it does somewhere buried in there, but I don't know of it. But I do like Qualtrics for the integrated ones and the ability to assess from a larger populations, if you will, because Qualtrics is pretty accessible and interface usable. So again, you can take a picture of that QR code and it'll take you to a Qualtrics page, which we used to use exclusively as we stopped using paper and pencil. We used paper and pencil for these modules a long time ago. So here you can see an example of what a module might look like. In this case, this is a subjective rating from a preceptor. So our preceptor fills out one of these for every student. So let's say the end of football, our two preceptors, they have 6 students, so they'll go through and they'll rate the 3 they worked with the most, and they'll put the student's name in. Then they'll indicate where they are, basically do juniors and seniors. And then they go through, this is basically a scale, and semester we evaluate them. We have a score we want them to achieve. And by graduation time, we want them all to be 10 out of 10 in these clinical capabilities, right? But they can't be 10 out of 10 as a junior or a false senior and all these things. That'd be a little weird. So I lost track of my mouse here. You can see they can go in here and basically rate each student on each of the clinical capabilities from 0 to 10. Now, if it's, for example, a fall senior, we want our students to be 8 out of 10. but they're not all going to be because their experiences are different. Some may just come off a high-risk sport instead of had a lot of musculoskeletal and concussion and bracing and padding and prevention stuff. Some might be coming from a different sport, or maybe from the medical rotation at the clinic. And so their numbers are going to be a little different. They get this rating done, and they also get, they rate themselves, and then they compare where they think they are in each one of these proficiencies, capabilities, and they can rate that to where their preceptor sees them. And at the bottom, you see that for any capability that a preceptor rated the student lower than the metric. So again, if it's a fall senior, we want them 8 out of 10. At the bottom, that little box, they have to provide direct feedback as to why. So if student X got a 4 out of 8 on acute care of injury and illness, then they have to give specific information. And maybe the student doesn't remember the knowledge well enough. They don't remember the signs and symptoms of exertional heat illness, and they had one of those cases, right? So the preceptor could be as specific and direct with their feedback there as possible. So that's an example of a subjective rating of how our students are doing on those clinical capabilities as they move forward throughout the curriculum. So those are done at 4 different times: junior year, fall, spring, senior year, fall, and spring, by students and by preceptors. I'm having a little mouse problem here all of a sudden. I have to go to plan B here. I'm plugging in a different mouse. My mouse seems to have frozen. Apologize, bear with me for a second with technical difficulties. Jeez, this is miserable. Where? I can't see my mouse. It just stopped showing up. Okay. Okay, sorry, apologize. Hopefully back on track here. So that's an example of a subjective rating. And then if you take a picture of this QR, so it's a different one. It takes you to this. So here is one of our integrated modules, and this one is exertional heat illness. So the situation is the student is working in a marathon endurance race, and an athlete presents, and she's apparently going into exertional heat illness. And we, again, the beauty of Qualtrics is you can't go backwards, right? So you can do this in teams as well by inserting different sections. So the student can't change their answer. So here you ask them based on the scenario, what's your top 3 DDXs? What's your DDX, top 3 diagnoses? And they enter them in here, blah, blah, bling, blah, blah, boom, you know, rhabdo, exertional heat illness, exhaustion, et cetera. And then they can come forward, and then we ask them the number 1 diagnosis based on the case. And then we ask them to rate their confidence level. These little fun games here. They can go, I'm really confident, 10 out of 10. So we can see which students are confident in the diagnosis of that case or not. Okay. And then you take them through and you can give them more data. So now you give them actual P data. Again, they can't go backwards and change their answer here, which is the beauty of it. And you take them through the case step by step. And now you've given them the key data here, right? And now you're asking them to manage, to react based on the best available evidence. So in this case, the NATA position statement on exertional heat illness, they should be able to outline the key important steps. So now you're assessing diagnostic reasoning and therapeutic reasoning, if you will, the management part. And again, we're asking for data on decision-making and risk factors for exertional heat illness, especially given that it wasn't an incredibly bad situation, a little bit of an outlier. So think laterally. So again, we're trying to see, are they capable here? And then we tell them what it was, right? We tell them that what it was, we give them the feedback. And if they didn't get it right, we ask them to kind of think about things that may let them off the path. And then before they move forward, and then they hit enter and it's submitted. Okay? And then when we do that, students fill it out. We get an email here that tells me that my 11 students who graduated this a couple weeks ago completed the response, and I can go right away and click on view responses or view report. just like so. So automatically get feedback. All right. As far as how and when we do this, kind of our blueprint. Sophomore spring, we look at, it's all based on what they've learned and what they've covered. So we do little modules on EBP and prevention, health, and wellness. Then junior year, we start to do, and again, these are all kind of separate capability assessments using progress testing. And then you start to see senior fall, and now we start to integrate things. We start to see things connected, because that's what clinical practice is. And then in the spring, it's all clinical integrated capabilities like clinical reasoning and management and assessment of situations across the various domains. So we have it mapped out as to when we collect the data. This is what the data looks like. This is our seniors. So from last fall till the end of the year. So different modules. So this, for example, is capability number 5, acute care of injury and illness. This is the clinical assessment, diagnosis, orthopedic, et cetera, et cetera. So it gives you a little more detail. Here's their scores. We like to have 70 or better for everything. And we go across here. And so to 8, column H is where we have the different modules kind of separated out. And then we start to look at integrated scores. So here you can see this integrated diagnostic reasoning, like the one you just saw, exertional heedlessness, is integrating evidence-based practice. It's integrating acute care emergencies. It's integrating diagnostic reasoning, et cetera. We integrate the gen med ones and the psychosocial ones we do into a composite score. We look at just acute care and musculoskeletal by itself as a composite score, which is just a way we have of looking at different related domain scores and developing composites. And then we have a comprehensive average score. You can see here that 2 of our students clearly scored below our mark of 70 or better, the overall being acceptable at 76. But now we see we had 2 out of 11 students that didn't perform as well. Right now, they've gotten these grades throughout the entire year. So these aren't secret. They know they're great. Every time we do an assessment module, progress test, they get their scores and they know where they are. And so this started all the way back in September and finished just a few weeks ago with the last clinic with this one, column I. And they get this data, and then we share this data with our faculty. So kind of a spider web format, the student in blue, the cohort in red, so they see where they are in each of the individual capabilities, and then of course the integrated ones and their comprehensive score. So a nice visual representation of what their performance looks like, so they know what their guided journey is when it's on path and when it's not on path. You can see he performed a little bit lower on a couple, integrated diagnostic reasoning for general medical and psychosocial and acute care. So those would be the 2 areas this student should focus on more with direct feedback on how to make improvements. So take-home pearls of all that is, number 1, define well your goals and objectives and consider something like capabilities, but whatever it is, make sure you're comfortable with it and it captures what it is you want it to be. Keeping in mind, really important kind of subtle perspective is that, feedback and assessment should be designed to make your students better clinicians, right? Not better test takers. So the progress test should make them better learners and better clinicians. So define your end goals well, your macro goals as well as you can. Formulate if you don't have an assessment capability team. I think one of the problems with a lot of program directors, at least in AT, that I know is we tend to do it all ourselves, and sometimes it's by force. But bring in your preceptors, a couple that are interested, bring in your core faculty, and bring in students, and even maybe new grads, students that have been through your program, to ask them about different ways you should form your programmatic assessment, your formative assessment, and assessment as learning approach. Work backwards from those goals, focus on assessment for learning and as learning. Maybe de-emphasize a little bit, if you emphasize a lot, assessment of learning, because it doesn't drive learning as much, as well as for and as. So think more about an as learning approach. Conceptualize your programmatic assessment as a guided journey, not a magical mystery tour. Aggregate data for greater signal, less noise. Don't be afraid of qualitative data. Don't be afraid of narrative data. Don't be afraid of reflective artifacts. They all add to, and if you collect enough data from enough different sources of high validity, middle validity, low validity, you'll have greater signal and less noise, and there'll be meaning in your outcomes and change. And you can assess clinical reasoning and clinical decision-making using digital platforms. There is evidence in the medical literature that suggests you can, so don't be shy and thinking it has to be work-based or simulation-based with live patients or standardized patients. Some resources have been very helpful to me is EBMA, the AME. They have a whole series of free webinars that are available now for the rest of the year. The AME does. EBMA has a couple great conferences to think about going to. Harvard Macy has a lot of free webinars now. You can follow all these folks on Twitter. Keyline Podcasts, a lot of great reviews of great articles by well-versed scientists at Wilson Center. It's been very helpful. I actually just hot off the press, this came in my inbox the other day, so I have interlibrary loan request put in for this. I wish I had it before today, but look at the title. It's Practical Steps and Advantages to Online Assessment. So I'm looking forward to getting that article and seeing how it jives with what we're doing. I want to thank Bryce and Brennan, the man behind the scenes, the Wizard of Oz behind the green curtain, of course, Glenn for having me and setting us up and being the moderators. And now that leads us to open discussion for those who wish to stick on. I'll stick around for as long as needed to have a chat.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. That was awesome in terms of the presentation. I think it was pretty comprehensive, lots and lots of information for us to think about. There are some questions. We've had 10 questions posted so far. You may just remind you again that if there are some questions that are already been asked and you want to have that specific question answered, just go in and like that question because it brings it up higher into our priority list. We have about, I would say about 10 minutes for some questions. The first question we have, Paul, is this comes from Dylan Highland. Do you utilize forms rather than an LMS because of the back-end data analysis tools?
I think I use form again. I just started using this year. I think the thing I like about forms the most is how quickly you can give feedback and share the results either with the students and with your faculty, with your team. I mean, I could send you guys a form right now, 10 questions, and then you could take it, and then within 2 minutes, I could give you not just your grade, but I could identify every mistake that you made. And then I could have the aggregate group score for that, and then look at it and go, geez, let's say we're doing, subacromial impingement syndrome, and we're talking about the force couples between deltoid and rotator cuff and serratus and the traps, et cetera. And I got to make sure you guys know this before we move forward. I could literally, within 10 minutes, realize that 70% of you guys don't know the difference between the upper trap and the lower trap when it comes to scapulohumeral rhythm. And then so tomorrow's class, that's what I'm doing, right? So on a micro level, from class to class, the immediacy of the data and the usability, and then the students get it right away too, especially if it's specific KSA knowledge and skill stuff that they should know, they have that feedback right away. And then the adaptability to take that and make it bigger into a more of a programmatic assessment module. I can copy that exam and add to it and use it again and store it. I can share, I can collaborate with it. The other thing I didn't share is I can make a form and send it to my faculty as a collaborative project, and they can add to it and they can change it and they can tweak it. So we do use a learning portfolio. We use TaskStream to record stuff. We're moving towards something else. I know there's eValue and Typhon, a lot of others out there from learning management systems. We haven't gone to one of those yet. We're going to transition to one of those with a master's degree to keep track of things. I think the key to learning management system is having a usable dashboard where I can more easily aggregate all these data pieces. So to your point, it does take a lot of my time, in fair honesty. It takes me a lot of time to make that spreadsheet and those spider webs and send it out because I'm doing it all by hand. We are looking forward to, and if you guys have suggestions on ones that you like, an LMS that automates and aggregates the different data pieces. For example, the 4 OP exams that we have in sophomore year for assessment 1 and 2. Can I aggregate those 4 OP scores with other artifacts that dial in with capability number 3? So right now I'm doing it visually, I'm doing it myself. So eventually it's going to become unmanageable.
Great, thanks, Paul. The next question, just actually one of the things in the chat, somebody asked if you could go back to the reference slide, and
Sure.
While you're doing that, I'll just ask for the question. This one comes from Valerie Herzog. What do you do for those 2 students who didn't meet the minimum scores that you wanted?
Well, again, Val, great question. So we don't use them as classic summative assessment measures. Like there's no stakes for that. They don't fail. We are considering doing that though with our master's degree, of using milestones using these progress tests. And what we're doing really is piloting them now and getting them more valid and more user-friendly and more clean and more likable. So what we're contemplating is using those as a master's degree, not starting until fall of 2021, as actual milestones. And if they don't hit that mark, Valerie, then we're going to give them direct feedback, and they get this is not permanent, but what we're toying with is then they have a chance to take it again. Now the big question is, how many times you do it? Do you get a retake, 2 retakes, 3 retakes, or whatever, before we kick them out of the program or have some other measure? But right now, we're not using those as summative data. We're using them as macro data, which is one of the things I want to get clear. Is in a classic way, we don't collect any real summative data. There's no high stakes associated with any data I collect. It's for assessment as learning. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. That was good. I think we have time for one more question, and the question is coming from Timothy Culpa. If you're using using the macro as a non-stakes assessment, do you tell the students there are no stakes? If so, how do you gauge student effort?
Great question. So one of the things that's nice, and I think all of us will admit this, is students become part of our program. And so we end up with a nice professional respect and relationship. And that's part of the recommendation from one of the papers I shared you, is develop relationships and get the students to buy into this. And so it does start way back when in doing that. But to that point, we tell them that this is important for a couple of reasons. And this is why we use them dually. Number one, it's the most direct capability or domain specific information they're getting as they prepare for the BOC exam throughout the year. So they see those marks, they see the red numbers if they have them. They know they got a 41 on psychosocial domains or whatever. They know that basically if they have 10 questions on the BOC exam dealing with psychosocial wellness, the odds are they're not going to perform well if our sampling has any direct merit to the questions, which of course is random. But so they know that's the best, most direct feedback they get to prepare themselves for the BOC and for subsequent practice afterwards, identifies their mistakes. And when it is low, which kind of goes to Valerie's question too, if it's therapeutic modalities, physical agents, they know they need to go talk to my professor of record for that. And Todd, our professor of record, who's on here, he knows that too. He knows that these 3 students perform poorly. So they have the direct report and directions to go kind of get help and more direct feedback from that domain. They know if it's musculoskeletal assessment, which is the classes I teach, they come to me and I'll dial in on their weak spots. So Timmy, I hope that answers your question. So the other part is they know that it's for a programmatic assessment. We do put a little heat on them and tell them this is for Katie too, that this is an accreditation requirement. But I do talk to them one-on-one. I meet with them every week for an hour as part of the clinical structure. And I say, look, guys, this is important for us to see if we've done our job well. So it's a lot of that genuine, authentic salesmanship. I don't really bribe them with anything. And I say, I do need your best effort. If you're half asleep and if you don't put your effort in, it's meaningless. It's meaningless to you and it's meaningless to me. So that's the way we do it. But there is a concern with that. You're right.
Well, thanks very much, Paul. That's been great. I think we're pretty much running out of time. I just want to have a few minutes at the end here. Just to answer one question that Dylan has in terms of access to this presentation. The presentation has been recorded and it will be uploaded onto the World Federation website. You can go to www.wfatt.org. And also with the EducAtionalist's website or through the NATA, I think Paul will make sure that that's uploaded there. I want to take the time now to really thank you, Paul, for a really wonderful and very, very informative presentation. I think it's probably generated a lot of interest in moving forward, and I think you've done a real service to the athletic therapy educational community in terms of really informing us on the formative and the summative approach to assessment. I want to thank all the participants as well. I think the people, we had a great turnout. We're very, very happy with this for our first initiative. I guess at the outset, I was just so interested in introducing Paul and getting this going that I neglected to introduce myself. But my name is Glenn Bergeron, and I'm the current president of the World Federation of Athletic Training and Therapy. And the World Federation is an association of associations, and we happen to be celebrating our 20th anniversary. And we're dedicated to the promotion of the profession of athletic therapy worldwide. And We do have membership categories. As I said, we're a member, an association of associations, not of individuals. But we do have two primary categories. One is our international or our national organizations, so organizations in each country. So if you have an organization and you want to join the World Federation, please contact us through our website. If you are if you are interested in starting up an organization in your own country, please let us know that too, because that's something that we're very interested in helping to facilitate. In the context of this particular presentation, where I think most of the people were academics, we do have an academic institution membership. It's $150 US for the year. We now have, we're starting to create a critical mass of academic institutions. We have 28 academic institutions from 8 different countries now, and they have their own Facebook group that they're now starting to work on and developing a critical mass of integration and collaboration, which I think is just fantastic. We do have an academic institution committee that is working very hard and making sure we can develop facilitation of research, exchange programs, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're interested in joining that, again, you can go onto the World Federation website and you can find the application form, but you can also contact us and we can give you more information as well. If you are an individual and you're interested in promoting the athletic therapy globally in your own country, again, please let us know. We do have committees. We want to engage as many people as we possibly can. And this is a global effort, so can't fall on just a few people. It's going to take a real big effort from a lot of people. We really invite you to visit our website, but also go to our other social media, including our Facebook, our Twitter, and LinkedIn. Follow us. We're always putting up new information about that. So again, just engaging the World Federation. We're so excited about having all these people now know about the World Federation, and we're looking forward to you being part of the World Federation family. So again, I want to thank Dr. Geisler for a very, very important session today. And I wish you all the best in these challenging times. And please take a few moments to respond to the questionnaire at the end. It will help us formulate where we go forward with future webinars and educational experiences. So thanks very much. I'll let Bryce now sign off all of our attendees and potentially, I guess, with the panelists, if we can stay on for a few minutes, that'd be great to debrief. Thank you very much again. Talk to you soon.